Killing Them Gently, a supernatural mystery of horror and suspense. Written by Thomas Fincham. Narrated by Stephen Michael Preston. Chopping Them Gently, Episode 2. My head jerked forward. My eyes snapped open. I took a deep breath. I instantly knew where I was. The familiar interior of the Escalade confirmed it. "Good morning," a voice said. Startled, I turned. Royce, my guardian angel, was sitting in the passenger seat. "How did you get inside my car?" I said. He smiled. "Getting in and out is not a big issue for us." I rubbed my eyes. "I guess now I can check breaking and entering by an angel off my list of things to see." He didn't respond. Until a day ago, I was Peter Murphy, father and husband. Now I was Alex Weller, lonely and, apparently, waking up in my car. Peter Murphy was shot 12 times while he sat in his car. Now, as Alex Weller, I was alive and well. According to Royce, I had been given a second chance at life in return for providing my services. I used to be a detective in the Clydesdale Police Department, but now I was a detective at the Clayton Police Department. I was to hunt and exterminate these, how can I say it, unnatural or unexplainable things. Until yesterday, I wouldn't have believed that such things existed, but now I was beginning to reconsider. How is Peter Murphy doing? I asked. "Not too good," Royce said. "I'm afraid his recovery will be a miracle." I knew what that meant. Peter Murphy had little or no chance of surviving. How could he? His body had been riddled by over a dozen bullets. I didn't know how many people had lived through that, or if they had, and if they were able to live a normal life. The last thought made my heart sink. I shook my head. What Royce was really saying is that if I continued completing his tasks, I, or Peter Murphy, may have a chance of making it through. What Royce was also saying is that he could provide that miracle Peter Murphy needed. "How are my wife and son?" I finally asked. "As you would expect them to be," Royce said. I nodded. My wife Rosie was probably doing her best to keep everything normal for my son Maddie. She had never been the strong one in our family. That was my job. But she always knew what was best for our son. I knew I could count on her to take care of him if anything was to happen to me. As a member of the police department, I couldn't say I ever thought of a scenario in which something did happen to me. It was a horrible and gut-wrenching thought, but it was something I had to prepare myself for. That was why, after our marriage, I had made sure to request a transfer from the patrol division to the detective division, so that I was no longer on the front lines. I knew that walking the beat day or night was not going to be conducive to a long-lasting marriage, or even to my health. I thought solving murders as a detective would be much safer. How wrong I was. "I need to know which hospital Peter Murphy is being kept in," I said. For a brief second, I saw a flicker of anger pass over Royce's face. His voice, which was normally deep and soothing, suddenly turned loud and harsh. "You cannot make contact with your other life," he said. "Why not?" I asked, annoyed. "We need you to focus on the tasks that we have given you. You have understood our agreement. Should you fail to complete our tasks, the consequences would not be to your liking. I can assure you of that." I was seething. I never knew angels use threats. He turned away. "It will do you no good reaching out to your other life. You are now Alex Weller. You have your own responsibilities." I was about to say something when my cell phone rang. Royce watched me as I let it ring. I wanted to tell him what I really thought about him and the agreement, but I pulled out my phone. "Weller," I said. I listened. "All right, I'll be there." When I shut the phone, Royce was gone. Good riddance, I thought. I parked near an alley and found Detective Miranda Butterfield and Superintendent Brian Davis standing before a line of yellow police tape. "How are you feeling?" I said to Miranda. Our last case had shaken her up pretty badly, so I figured I should ask her. It was not only out of courtesy, but also because she had become my new partner. "Good, thanks," she said, looking down. "And you?" "As good as it can be." "All right," Davis said. "Enough of the niceties. We've got a situation on our hands." "Show me," I said. We went underneath the police tape and headed to a metal dumpster. Miranda said, "Victim is male, maybe 20 to 25, and he's missing an arm." "What?" I said, not sure if I had heard her correctly. "From the looks of it, his right arm has been sawed off." "You get his name?" I asked. "We're working on it." I looked inside the dumpster. The unknown victim was sprawled amongst the various trash and debris. He was completely naked, save for a piece of cloth covering his privates. "Any idea how he got here?" I asked. "We thought you might help with that," Davis said. "You were quite clever the last time, so let's see if you can do it again." "Right. Well, we know he didn't walk here on his own, or maybe he did and decided to rip his clothes off after dismembering his own arm." I could tell Davis was not amused by my comments, but Miranda was smiling. "But I'll go with the theory that someone brought him here. Are there any security cameras anywhere?" Miranda shook her head. "It's a rundown neighborhood, so there aren't many high-end things to steal, and the alley is pretty secluded. The perpetrator picked a great place to dump the body." I looked back inside the dumpster. "How much do you think the body weighs?" I asked. "Why?" Miranda replied. "Just from a cursory glance, I would guess the victim is 6'1", around 180 or 190, and he looks to be in great shape. The victim's chest, abs, and remaining arm look chiseled. What I'm saying is the victim looks like someone who takes good care of himself. This means our perpetrator is someone who is physically robust. He has to be, or else how could he lift and drop the body here? And I'm guessing he met the victim at a gym." "Really?" Davis said, scratching his chin. "You got all that from just looking at him?" "Not really." I shrugged. I pointed to the body. 4 tiny lines were tattooed near the ribs. "Eat, gym, tan, sleep." "I'll be damned," Davis muttered. "You are something, you know that, Weller?" "Nice work," Miranda said. He curled the 35-pound dumbbell, held the weight up for 3 seconds, and then lowered his arm. His face was red and he was out of breath, but overall, he felt great. He continued the same curl sets with his other arm. "Great job, Stefano," a female instructor said, passing him. "You look good." She winked at him. Stefano Belliano smiled back. Of course he looked good, he wanted to say, but he held his tongue. He continued with his regular workout routine. After working on his arms, he worked on his chest and shoulders. Tomorrow he would focus on his back and legs. He loved working on his body. He was lean, fit, and his body fat was less than 5%. He also loved the attention he got. 2 girls on the other side of the gym were looking in his direction. One in particular caught his eye. She was tall and blonde, and she had a killer body. He smiled at her. She smiled back. There were days he felt like he was Adonis, and in some instances he did look like one too. He felt powerful and without restraints. He could do whatever he wanted. His confidence was sky high. Today felt like one of those days. Nonchalantly, he walked over to her. He told her how great she looked. She smiled, revealing her whitened teeth. He knew that no matter how attractive a woman was, they all liked to be complimented. He asked her name. It was Joanna. He asked her for her phone number, and without any hesitation, she gave it to him. Stefano then pulled the towel over his shoulders and headed for the showers. He felt like he was indestructible. And today he actually was. "Okay, we got the victim's name," Miranda said. I looked up from my laptop. "It's from his fingerprints," she said. "Years ago, he had been convicted on a minor misdemeanor charge. That explains why we have his prints." "So, what's his name?" I asked. "Philippe Marceau, age 26. Says he was born in France." "You got an address?" I asked. "Printing it now." A man came over. He wore a leather jacket on top of what looked like a Hawaiian shirt. "You're Weller, right?" he said, leaning on my desk. "Yes," I said. "I'm Special Detective Conrad Johnson." He grabbed my badge from my desk and began playing with it. "Everyone calls me CJ. You can call me SD CJ. Get it?" He smiled at his own cleverness. "How about I call you Con John, because it looks like you're going to sell me something like a con man?" Miranda burst out laughing. CJ's face turned burgundy. "It's not good to start making enemies, especially when you're new," he said between clenched teeth. "Listen," I said, standing. I was a good inch or two taller than him. "I'm not new. You are old. And for your information, I'm not interested in making enemies, but I am also not interested in making friends. I have a job to do, and that's what I intend to do." I meant every word of it. I was in this situation by powers beyond my control. I was making the best of it, and the last thing I needed was for some smartass to try to pull rank on me. I snatched the badge from him. And the next time you touch any of my stuff, I'll shoot you. He looked at me to see if I was serious. I was. Okay, he nodded. Can't say I didn't try to be nice. He looked around. Everyone was staring at us. He then hurried away. Miranda said, "He's a jerk. Don't mind him. He's harmless." During my career, I had met people like CJ. They always tried to take advantage of the new transfers or recruits. It was the females who were abused most. In order to move up, they thought they had to appease guys like CJ. More often than not, these new officers would end up doing so much that they would burn out, and when it came time for promotions, they were left high and dry. Lucky for me, I didn't care for any promotions. If I had my way, I would be out of Clayton PD and be back to Clydesdale PD in no time. But until that time came, I had to do my job. "Let's go check that address out," I finally said. The apartment was in a nice area of the city. You could tell a lot about a neighborhood by how clean it was. This place was immaculate. I didn't find one single thing out of place. The trees and bushes were neatly trimmed. The building walls were without any signs of graffiti. The street lamps had a fresh coat of paint on them. Even the fire hydrants were glowing with newness. We entered a recently renovated building, walked through a fancy lobby, and went up in a nice elevator. We got off on the 14th floor and approached a door. We knocked and waited. Half a minute later, the door swung open. The person who stood before us nearly made my mouth drop. He looked exactly like our victim. Same height, same hairstyle, and even the same facial features. The only difference was that he looked a little out of shape compared to the victim. "Yes," he said. "Is this Philippe Marceau's place?" Miranda asked. "Yes. Who are you?" he said. We flashed our badges. "You are?" Miranda asked. "I'm Francois, Philippe's twin brother." We were seated in the living room, which I could tell was expensively decorated. I knew this because I had spent many hours shopping for furniture with my wife. Our house contained furniture that had cost me several months' worth of salary. Rosie had never asked much from me, but when we bought the house, she wanted it to have a particular look. That look, as I later realized, was chic and expensive. Francois wiped his eyes and blew his nose. We had just informed him of the demise of his brother. "His arm?" Francois looked at us. "Why would someone do that?" Frankly, that was a very good question. What could someone possibly achieve by cutting another person's arm off? Perhaps the perpetrator didn't like the way the victim shook his hand. I knew of one country where a person's hand was cut off if the person was found stealing, but not the entire arm, I'm sure. "We don't know why," Miranda replied, "but that's why we're here. Can you tell us anything that might help us find who did this?" Francois shrugged. "I don't know where to begin. Philippe was a sweetheart. He was fun, exciting, and great to be around. Everyone loved him." "What did he do?" Miranda asked. "I'll show you." Francois got up and left us. He returned with a black binder. He placed it in front of us and flipped it open. The binder contained a collage of photos. The photos were of Philippe dressed in various clothing styles. There was a shot of him in a suit, another shot of him in a leather jacket, another of him in a polo shirt and shorts. I had to admit, the kid was a natural. "Philippe was in demand," his twin brother said. "He was always flying here and there, this city, that city. That's why we could afford a place like this." He moved his hands around the room. "What do you do?" I asked. "I am a med student," he said. "Philippe was never really around, and this place was usually empty, so he let me stay here." "Was Philippe having any troubles, either at work or in his personal life?" Miranda asked. Francois shook his head. "No, none that I know of. If he did, he would have told me for sure. We were very close." My detective instincts were bothering me, so I asked, "Do you know if Philippe went to any gyms in particular?" "Sure he did. That's how he kept in shape for the photo shoots." He gave us an address, which was about a block or so away. When we showed the gym manager Philippe's photo, she immediately recognized him. Philippe was a regular. He was here in the mornings and sometimes even in the evenings. Everybody liked him. He was like family. I asked her, when he didn't show up today, did that raise a red flag? She shrugged. I mean, we don't keep tabs on people, but with Philippe, we knew that if he wasn't here, then he was someplace doing a photo shoot. He got along with everyone at the gym? I asked. Sure, she said. We never had any problems. What about his brother, Francois? Did you notice any issues between him and Philippe? I said. She shook her head. No, never. In fact, Philippe always spoke glowingly about Francois. Do you mind if we look around? I said. Sure, she said. Hey, are you guys a member of any gym? We've got a great promotion going on right now. I don't work out, I said. I'm fine, thanks, Miranda said. We walked around the open space. The gym was divided into many sections. One for the treadmills and ellipticals, another for the weight machines, and then one further in the back for free weights. Something told me the gym was somehow the link to finding Philippe's killer. I didn't have any forensic or even circumstantial evidence to back it up. It was just a feeling I had learned to follow. There was a reason behind my instincts. Philippe was an ardent gym-goer. This meant he was here more than any other place. This also meant he was bound to share something with someone, but finding that someone was going to be a difficult task. We spent the next half hour chatting with the members, but we turned up no leads. Outside, Miranda said, Sorry your theory didn't pan out. I didn't say anything. I was sorry too. Stefano entered his loft and immediately went to the computer. He spent the next couple of hours on the internet. He then moved to the other side of the loft. It was shielded behind a large divider. He pushed the divider aside and entered his studio. Stefano was a photographer, but his choice of shots could be considered by some as morbid. He lifted a print and held it up to the light. It was a shot of a male torso. The chest was perfectly shaped with the muscles tight and ripped. It was the exact upper body he had always hoped for. He would contact the person in the photo and schedule another photo shoot. He pulled out a stack of photos and slowly began going through them. The photos were of arms, legs, necks, hands, feet, every part of the human body. He stopped at one photo. It was of a leg, from the knee down. Stefano examined it and then moved to a wall. The wall had several photos tacked on it. The photos were placed in the shape of a human body, with each part linking to the next. He placed the photo of the leg underneath the photo of a thigh. He then moved back and examined it. The body wasn't complete, but it was getting there. He was missing a few more pieces, but he wasn't in a hurry to find them. The ones on the wall had to be just right. Once completed, his creation would represent the ideal human body. We were back at the department when Miranda suddenly got up from her desk and said, I have to go. I had recently become her partner, so I didn't want to start asking any personal questions. She looked at me, sighed, and then said, My husband is on a business trip, which means I'm left to manage everything. Our son Elliot got into a fight at school, and I have to go talk to the principal. I nodded. I have a son too, I said. His name is Matthew, but we call him Matty. How old is Elliot? 7, she said. Matty is 7 as well, I said, surprised. Wow, that's great, she said. Maybe one day we can get the boys together for a fun activity. That would be nice, I said. I felt a twinge of regret. Since becoming Alex Murphy, I had not once been able to see my son. I hope everything is okay, I finally said to her. I hope so too. With that, she was gone. I leaned back in my chair and thought of Matty. I grabbed my coat and left the division. I watched and waited across from a large brown brick building. It was one of the oldest buildings in the city, built around the end of the 1800s. It was also a courthouse. Thousands upon thousands of cases had passed through the courtrooms in that building. As a detective, I had been summoned to testify in many cases there. A man came out of the main doors and then proceeded down a long flight of concrete stairs. I took a deep breath and got out of my car. I didn't know how, but I had to take a chance. I raced up to the man. He was on his cell phone talking rapidly. Raymond Chan? I said. He turned and looked at me. The cell phone was still attached to his ear. Yes, he said. Can I speak to you for a minute? I said. He said a few words to whomever was on the other end and hung up. I don't have much time, he said. I've got a meeting to go to. You always do, don't you? I said, smiling. A look of confusion spread over his face. I'm sorry, do I know you? Yes, you do, and you wouldn't believe me if I told you how. He eyed me up and down. I knew he was mulling whether I was crazy or not. Let me first say what I know about you, I began. Your name is Raymond, but you prefer to be called Ray. In high school, everyone called you Ray Ray. You once had the dumbest notion that you could be a big-time musician. Hence, you took on the name of DJ RR. I could see the color in Ray's face drain. You eventually smartened up and went to college, getting a degree in criminology. From there, you went to law school, and after failing twice, you passed the bar exam. You were married to your high school sweetheart, Janet, but once you joined a big law firm, you started working longer hours, which resulted in both of you spending too much time apart and finally getting a divorce. You like a fast lifestyle, even though you know one day it will catch up to you. You love high-end cars, which, if I remember correctly, you just bought a brand spanking new silver Audi. Ray stared at me. He finally said, "Who are you?" "I'm your best friend," I said with a big smile. Ray sat stunned, staring in my direction. We were inside his Audi. I told him everything that had happened so far. Throughout my story, Ray had been gripping the steering wheel as if it might slip out of his hands. I could tell it was too much for him to swallow all at once. I didn't blame him. I wish there had been some other way for me to tell him. When I was done, he said, "Is that really you, Peter?" "Sure is," I said. "Who else would know so much about you?" "Unbelievable." Ray looked out the window. He scratched his cheek. "Does Rosie know?" I shook my head. "And she can't ever know," I said. "Why not?" He looked incredulous. "You have to tell her." "And say what?" I said. "Right now, the body of your husband is in some hospital fighting to survive while I am really your husband, but I have to complete tasks for an angel who shows up unexpectedly in my car? Seriously?" He gave me a look. "Well, if you put it that way. By the way, which hospital are they keeping me in?" "You sure you want to know?" Ray said. "Yes, it's my body. What about Rosie and Maddie?" "They're always there, by your bedside." "They are?" I was choked up. I had to control myself from breaking down. I couldn't imagine what they were going through. I said, "They can't know about me, but I have to see what I look like now." "Okay, but be ready because you, or your body in this case, does not look good." "I have to know." Mount Pleasant Hospital. It was one of the best hospitals in the city. I felt somewhat better knowing that I, or Peter Murphy, was being well taken care of. "Thanks, Ray," I said, getting out of the Audi. "I'll call you if I need anything." He pounded on the treadmill, going at a rate almost faster than his legs would allow him. Stefano was following the high-intensity interval system, where he would run for 2 minutes, jog for a minute, and then run for another 2 minutes. He did this routine of run, jog, run for a good 30 minutes. He found this system helped him stay in better shape. He slowed the treadmill to catch his breath. He was sweating profusely, which was exactly what his intentions were. He was burning fat, and that would help him control his weight. In place of the fat, he would build muscles. He pressed the button, and the treadmill accelerated again. He took fast strides, trying to keep up with the speed. He checked the time on the machine. Another 40 seconds, and he would slow down. Suddenly, his left knee buckled. He tried to stay on the treadmill, but lost his balance. He desperately reached for the arm bars, but before he could grab one, the machine threw him back. His head hit the wall with a loud thud. He felt a sharp pain burst through his brain. Within seconds, he saw people huddled over him. They helped him get on his feet. One trainer brought him an ice pack. They asked if he needed to go to the hospital. He said no, he was just a little lightheaded. He sat on a bench in the locker room with the ice pack behind his head. He placed his hand over his knee. He knew exactly what had happened on the treadmill. He had always prepared for something like this, but it was too soon. He still had months, or at the very least, weeks before he needed a replacement. He now had to find a new victim. The victim was on the rowing machine when Stefano spotted him. The way his legs contracted when he moved back and forth on the machine told Stefano he was the one. Stefano carefully made his way across the gym and planted himself on the rowing machine next to him. His left knee was not in any condition to put pressure on, so instead, Stefano lowered the resistance on the machine all the way to the bottom and began rowing it primarily with his arms. Up close, Stefano could tell the rower was in great shape. A minute or two went by before Stefano finally introduced himself. In return, Stefano got his name, Kiefer Homstad. Kiefer was a part-time student at a college, and he was also an aspiring actor. Perfect, Stefano thought. Exactly the type of candidate he was looking for. It was then that Stefano mentioned he was a photographer. Hearing this, Kiefer's ears perked up. Stefano also slipped in that some of his photos had made their way into fashion magazines. Kiefer was hooked. Stefano looked at his watch and got up. He then spoke as if he'd suddenly had a bright idea. Why didn't Kiefer come down to his studio? He would love to show him his portfolio and maybe even take a few shots of him. In fact, he was free that very moment. Kiefer nodded with a huge smile. He didn't have class until later anyway. The talk with Ray had livened up my spirits. Up until now, I had felt lonely and somewhat lost. Now I had my best friend on my side. Whatever I was going to deal with, he was going to be right next to me. I could always count on his support. Always. Ray would be my eyes and ears into my other life. Whatever happened to Peter Murphy, I would know about it. I was driving back to the apartment when my cell phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered it. It was the manager of the gym. I had remembered I had given her my card in case any information came up. Stefano Belliano, I said, repeating the name. Apparently on the night Philippe went missing, he was spotted leaving the gym with Belliano. The manager had just spotted him leaving with someone else, Kiefer Hamstad. What concerns you about this Belliano person? I asked. There's something not right about him, she said. I can't explain it, but it was the way he looked at the other members. It felt like he was staring at them like they were meat. I said nothing. I didn't know what to say. I know I sound like a crazy person, but he gives me the creeps. Anyway, you told me to call if I saw something. It's good that you did, I said. Do you have his address? Of course I do. He's also a member of the gym. I hung up and called Miranda. After a few rings, her voicemail came on. I told her I may have a lead and was going there right now. He came out of the room completely exhausted. The room used to be an office, but he had converted it into an operating room. The walls, floors, and even ceilings were covered in plastic sheets. Kiefer had been more than he'd bargained for. Upon returning to his loft, Stefano had given him a tour of his studio, minus the operating room, of course. Kiefer had found the photos of the limbs and other parts quite disturbing. But Stefano was prepared for it. He had learned to tell the same story to each of his many victims. The photos were taken in order to model such products as watches, shoes, sports accessories, and so on. Stefano could have covered the loft with photos of full models, but he enjoyed seeing the look on their faces when he showed them individual parts. It was as if he was taunting them. He was showing them who, or what, he really was. It was up to them to realize it sooner, rather than later. Kiefer was one of the people who found the photos revolting. Stefano wasn't overly concerned. Prior to the tour, he had offered Kiefer a glass of wine. The wine contained the date-rape drug. It was when Stefano was showing him the wall of the ideal man that Kiefer realized his drink had been spiked. He tried to make excuses to leave, that his friends were waiting for him, friends whom he had told where he would be. But Stefano knew he was lying. They all lied once they grasped the situation they were in. He could see it in their eyes, fear mixed with the realization of what was happening to them. Kiefer was someone who saw his predicament sooner, and he reacted to it. When Stefano had stepped away for a brief moment, he had bolted to the front door. What Kiefer didn't know is that a key was required to open the door from inside, and that key was in Stefano's possession. Hearing the noise at the front door, Stefano found Kiefer trying futilely to work the locks. He grabbed Kiefer from behind, incorrectly thinking that the drug would have taken effect. Instead, what he encountered was a person more determined than he could have imagined. It took Stefano a bruised rib, a scratched face, and a split lip in order to subdue him, and ultimately, kill him. But his job wasn't done. He then had to drag the body into the room and then proceed to dismember the left leg. It was more work than what was shown on TV. The muscles, the tendons, and the bone all had to be sawed off. This took a lot of energy and effort. Sure, he would have used an electric saw, but that would have caused too much noise. Instead, he had to do it manually. After he was done, there was the matter of the blood. It was everywhere, covering him and the area around him. Lucky for him, the plastic sheets would assist in cleaning it up. Stefano shut the door behind him and dropped to the floor. He was drenched in sweat. He wiped his brow and then took a deep breath. He wanted to take a quick nap. He was spent. He closed his eyes when pain shot through his left leg, reminding him of why he had gone through this entire process in the first place. He looked down at the package before him. It was Kiefer's left leg, wrapped in plastic. It was still warm, and the blood had started to leak from the sides. He got up and headed for the bedroom. He pushed the bed to the corner of the room. Underneath it, drawn in black coal, were symbols and letterings. He gently lay above the scrawling and placed the dismembered leg next to him. He closed his eyes and began reciting ancient text. He felt a sharp pain, first in his abdomen and then throughout his entire body. The pain was intense and blinding. He didn't dare open his eyes. The pain moved from his feet all the way to his head. It then stopped at his left leg. What happened next was more painful than anything he had ever imagined. It was so powerful and fierce that he fell unconscious. He didn't know how long he was out when his eyes snapped open. He heard a noise. He listened carefully. It was coming from the front door. He turned to the object next to him. The plastic wrap was now empty, only the blood from the leg remaining. He glanced down. His left leg felt rejuvenated and strong. The noise outside became louder. He got up and touched his lip. It was no longer cut. Even his face and ribs had instantly healed. He quickly looked around the loft to see if anything was out of place. Then he answered the door. I stood outside the address given to me by the gym manager and banged on the door again. I was about to leave when the door slid open. A man stood facing me. "I'm Detective Alex Weller," I said. "Are you Stefano Belliano?" "Yes," he slowly said. "What is this about?" "Can I come in?" I said. "I have a few questions that I'd like to ask you." "Am I in trouble?" he said. "No, I just want to clarify some things, if that's okay." He thought about it, and then held the door open for me. The loft was spacious, with large windows that streamed good lighting. I noticed that the ceilings went high up. It was a little cooler inside, but that could have been due to the open space. I was in the living room. Belliano stood by the kitchen wall. I asked if he was a member of the gym. He nodded. "I go there sometimes." "At the gym, did you meet a Philippe Marceau?" He thought about it. "I'm not sure. I meet a lot of people at the gym. How about a Kiefer Humstad?" He mulled the name over. "Yes, I think I did." "When?" I asked. He shrugged. "I think earlier today." "What did you talk about?" "General stuff. You see, I'm a photographer, and he's an aspiring actor, so we had something to talk about. I told him I would love to take photos of him, if he was interested, you know." "When was the last time you saw him?" "At the gym." "Well," I rubbed my chin. "Someone at the gym said they saw you leave together." "As a matter of fact, yes, we did," he said. "We left at the same time, but I came straight home. Let me think. He said he had class at night or something." Belliano faced me. "Why am I being asked these questions? Did something happen?" "No, nothing." I shook my head. We didn't have anything linking Belliano to either Philippe or Kiefer, except for a phone call from a manager who found him creepy. That wasn't much to go on, let alone interrogate a man on. "But there is one thing, though." I turned to him. "Someone at the gym also said they saw you leave with Philippe Marceau." "So?" he said. "Philippe Marceau's body was found in a dumpster. His arm was cut off." Belliano's mouth dropped. "Oh my God," he said. For a moment I thought he would fall to the ground. "Is it okay if I get a glass of water?" "Sure," I said. I watched him, but kept my hand near my holster just in case something unexpected happened. Over my career, I had learned a few things here and there. Belliano went to the sink and filled a glass with water. He returned. "Can I get you anything to drink?" he asked. "No thanks," I said. He took a sip from the glass. "It's so sad," he said. "I don't even know what to say. I will say, though, that I've had a lot of people from the gym come to my studio to model for me." "Where is your studio?" I asked. He pointed to an area that was shielded by a divider. "Do you mind?" I said. "No, go ahead." I went around the divider and found photography equipment and accessories lying around. I surveyed the area when my eyes stopped at a wall. It had photos of body parts taped to it. When I looked carefully, one of the photos was of a section near the ribs. Tattooed below the ribs were the words eat, gym, tan, sleep. Those same words were tattooed on Philippe Marceau. I quickly turned when Belliano rushed at me. In a split second, I had pulled out my weapon. I fired at the charging Belliano. The bullet ripped through his shoulder. He didn't howl or grimace. He grunted and moved forward. I fired again. This time the bullet pierced his thigh. Instead of stopping, he took 2 steps and hit me hard across the face. I fell down and then blacked out. When I awoke, I was cold. I shivered and sucked in cool air. I looked down, and I was naked except for a piece of cloth covering my privates. I was on the floor with my hands and legs tied by a piece of rope. I looked around. The room was covered in plastic. I caught a glimpse of something. It was a body. It was hunched over on the ground. Its left leg had been severed. "Kiefer Hamstad," a voice said. I turned. It was Belliano. He was standing by the wall. "That's Kiefer Hamstad. You came asking about him, right?" I noticed that Belliano's shoulder and thigh showed no signs of any bullets penetrating them. "How?" I began. "Your weapons can't kill me." He flexed his muscles. "I can't be hurt or harmed. What you fail to recognize is that I am invincible." His voice was filled with anger and hatred. From behind his back, he pulled out a saw. "You were foolish to come here. Now I'm going to cut you into pieces and mail your body to your family and friends." Fear pulsed through me. I was utterly scared. This was not how my life should have ended. I still had to find a way to get back to my family. He came over to me with the saw. The blade glistened from the tube lights above us. "I had no choice but to sacrifice those poor saps," Belliano said. "They gave themselves so that I could live." I had no idea what he was talking about. He placed the blade on my wrist. "Your death, on the other hand, will be in vain." I shut my eyes, preparing for the inevitable, when suddenly the door swung open. Belliano and I both turned. It was Miranda. "Put it down and get away from him," she yelled. He growled and rushed at her. She fired one shot. It tore through his skull. He dropped, first to his knees, and then to his side. Stefano Belliano was dead. I was sitting on Belliano's sofa, fully clothed now. Miranda had called it in, and soon the loft would be swarming with enforcement personnel. "How did you find me?" I asked her. She was standing by the front door. "Your voice message," she said. "You left Belliano's name on it. I tried calling you back, and when you didn't answer, I knew something might have happened. I was searching Belliano's address when I stumbled upon something interesting." She came over and handed me a photo. It showed a skinny, pale-looking young man in a wheelchair. "Who's that?" I asked. "Look carefully." I did, and that's when I saw it. The eyes. They were Belliano's. "It can't be," I slowly said. "It is," Miranda said. Belliano was taking body parts from healthy and, in some cases, active individuals and transforming his own body. I gave her a look. "Don't ask me how," she moved her shoulders. "But how do you explain that photo and the man I just shot?" I couldn't. "Plus, I did a little more research," she continued. "I found more cases of dead bodies with missing limbs. Maybe because the victims were homeless, but we didn't pursue the cases further. But if I had to guess, Belliano started off with them and then worked his way to these guys at the gym." I nodded. I didn't know what to say. The young man in the photo looked sickly and defeated. The man in the other room was strong and full of life. I could see why Belliano may have wanted to change who he was, but doing it at the expense of others was something I could never agree with. "I thought the last case was weird," she said. "This is even more so." I agreed and got up. I was shaken up pretty badly. "Where are you going?" she said. "I need a long walk," I said. "You can handle this." I had just escaped death. All I wanted to do was hold my wife and son and hug and kiss them. The man puffed on the cigarette and blew smoke into the air. He rubbed his shaved head and watched the sky. The sun had gone down, and it was now dark. He had spent the better part of the day keeping tabs on Peter Murphy. Murphy's body was being guarded by 2 police officers, but the best time to pay a visit, he found out, was at night when only one guard was on duty. He threw out the cigarette butt and pulled out a gun. He then crossed the road and headed straight for Mount Pleasant Hospital. This has been Killing Them Gently, a supernatural mystery of horror and suspense. Written by Thomas Fincham. Narrated by Stephen Michael Preston. Copyright 2019 by Thomas Fincham. Production copyright by Thomas Fincham.